Hello again, guys. Hello from a very cold garage, unfortunately. First of all, excuse the sniffles. I'm a little bit unwell. Right then. Now I know I remember saying at the end of our third video, in today's video we may be fitting the engine, but in reality that's not going to happen. These things take time, we're waiting on parts and we want to get it right. So I thought, so I can keep bringing you a little bit of content each week, I'll show you our rear axle setup, a special tool that we've made for fitting the rear springs, because if you're fitting them to an unweighted chassis and you get it wrong, it can be very dangerous. And also, despite the lot of effort I put into getting the wiring loom right, I have made a small mistake at the back. So I'll tag that onto the end of the video and I'll show you where I've gone wrong. Also, last week I posted a nice little video of my dad's Sunbeam Tiger, a bit of a start up, bit of an idle, bit of a rev, bit of a walk around video. So if that interests you in any way, then head over to the channel and give that a watch. Let's go and have a look, shall we? See you there. Right then, let's talk about the rear axle. Our 104 has a 5-stud rear axle, which is the hypoid version, as opposed to the 4-stud swivel and bevel. Now, there was a changeover point when it went from the 4-stud to the 5-stud, and online it says it changed over around about the 11th month of 1954. Now, our car's build date was August 54, but it doesn't say what its dispatch date was. So there's a good chance that this is the one that came with the car. Now, from a fitting point of view, we stripped it down to the rear axle itself, no diff, no plates, no drums, no half shafts, no nothing on it. And we've lifted it into the car. Now, it will sit there and it will just rest on the 2 little bump stops. Now, when you go to fit the springs themselves, you'll put them onto the body at the rear with the fulcrum pins and shackle pins, and then you'll put the locating bolt in the front, and then you'll be then left with about a 6-inch gap between the springs and the rear axle. Now, it's floating at both ends at this point. You've got a big gap at one side, big gap at the other, and you need to compress the springs up safely to meet the rear axle. Now, a lot of people said, jack the spring up to meet. We tried that, it didn't work. When you put the jack right in the middle, that's where your U-bolts and your securing plate goes. So your jack is right where you want to get your bolts in, so that didn't really work. And also, by the time we've loaded the spring up, the car was lifting off the axle stands. So I spoke to a few people, they said, add more weight. So I got my girlfriend, chucked her in the back of the car, jacked the car up, and it's still lifted. So she wasn't heavy enough, which she was really happy about, to be fair. So we thought, we need a safer way. Now what we've done is we got a ratchet strap, and so imagine this with none of this attached at all. You've just got the rear axle in the car and both springs sitting with no tension on them underneath. Now on the other side, we've got a ratchet strap, and we ratchet strapped the rear axle to the chassis itself, because the chassis leg sits inboard of where you want to put your U-bolts. And then what we did is we've made this spring compressor tool, which safely compresses the springs and sits outboard of the U-bolts, so that when it's all compressed and sat up in the car, you can still get your U-bolts in. So let's have a quick look at the tool and how it's made up. Right then, the rear spring compression tool. Now we've just got some very basic U section and some flat, some M12 studding, welded a couple of nuts on. So we've got a plate that will, excuse me, we've got a plate that will sit on top of the rear axle, and then we've got a plate that will sit underneath, and then we've just welded some nuts on to make some very long bolts, and then we've put a couple of little bits of rubber on there to protect our powder coating on the chassis, on the rear axle, sorry, and then we've just welded a couple of basic nuts on the bottom. So what we can do is we can then fit it to the car. Now, I'd love to fit it to the car, but unfortunately with our car being built up, it won't go on because of our back plates and our fuel lines and things like that. But you're going to have to use your imagination, unfortunately. Let's go back over to the car and have a little look. So, bump stop will be out of the way. All of the brake lines that you see will be out of the way. The lever arm dampers, handbrake cable, this bump stop and U-bolt will be out of the way. All the handbrake assembly will also be out of the way, panhard rod as well. So it will just be a basic empty rear axle, no diff, no weight to it. And like I say, strap it down in this place over the other side, and then this will be out of the way. These bolts won't be here because your back plates won't be here. And then your clamp, your tool will sit in here, and then it will sit across here, and then the bits of flat here will sit up underneath just here. So we've designed it so that it sits just on the edge of this leaf, so it's not going to skate around, and it'd be nice and safe. And then with it being strapped over the other side, you can then compress these two up to meet each other. Because if you weren't strapped over the other side, you'd be jacking it up and it would just hit the body like that. So like I say, strap the other side, build a bit of tension into it so that they're meeting. And also what we did is we got mole grips, and we gripped the bracket itself to the little flange on the back here of the rear axle. Now that kind of keeps it upright, because it tries to ride off from side to side, and when it's under that much tension you want it nice and flat so that you can get your U-bolts and your nuts and washers underneath, you see. Now when you've got that side under tension, you can then move round to the other side, and you can keep your single ratchet strap in place, and then you can put your clamp in, and then you can clamp the other side up under tension. And then when you've got your 4 U-bolts and all your nuts and washers in, don't forget your bump stops as well, guys, you can then remove your ratchet strap off the back, and the whole thing's under tension. Now with other cars of this era with leaf springs and rear axles, generally you've not got the chassis in the way. So people fit their rear springs and they pop the axle in, it sits on top of the springs, U-bolts, job done. But with the design of the Healey, with the chassis legs going through the middle, the chassis is in the way. So that's the way that we've overcome and got round things, really. Let's have a quick look at the rear axle and the components of it as well. Alright then guys, as I said, standard 5-stud rear axle with your splined hub and your 5 very expensive and very specific locking nuts, which I ended up getting from Steve Norton at Cape International. He sorted me out with those, which is good as gold, as he normally is. Big drums at the rear, painted silver, as all the other cars appear to be silver. Standard leaf springs with fulcrum pins, shackle pins, and then you've got your little brass bushes that push into the body itself in here. Standard lever arm damper and shock link as well. The rear axle is powder coated, and the panhard rod goes into the bracket that goes onto the rear axle there. Again, I struggle to find little pictures, so the more I show you, the more it may help somebody out. The panhard rod picks up on the bracket on the body over the other side, and the handbrake linkage itself goes through that little clip on the rear axle just here, and there's a little rubber grommet that goes through. Over this side, the handbrake goes onto the drum itself, and then you've got your 2 little fibre washers and a little retainer spring with the clip. Brake lines themselves come through onto the bracket there, flexi line into a splitter, and then they follow the kind of the shape of the rear axle. I believe that this line should go through here and should have a clip on it, but to save rebending it, I'm going to make an extending clip to hold it either here or here to kind of shore things up a little bit. And again, don't forget your little bump stops that go onto the body as well. Let's get over the other side and get a better look at that handbrake linkage and brake lines. As I said, brake lines come through, around, and they go down into your wheel cylinder at the bottom. You've got your little adjuster posts as well that will centralise your shoes inside. Handbrake linkage. Little grease point in the top which will fill this cavity up with grease. Again, 2 fibre washers, 2 fibre washers, and 2 more fibre washers there. You've got your handbrake bracket that goes onto the rear axle, and then this is threaded, which gives the handbrake lever the ability to go side to side, and also the threaded part here gives it the ability to turn when you pull the handbrake cable on itself, which goes through the rear axle and comes into a little retainer here. And that's about it really, all very standard. Don't forget your little plastic breather on top of your axle as well. And that's, like I say, it's a relatively straightforward rear end. It's just taken quite a long time to piece together when you've just got a box full of bits and a manual really. Now then, as for our wire and loom mistake, the wire and loom comes from the engine bay down. Now I put it up through there and I've run it in the clips that are in the bulkhead round the back, and then I've pushed it through the bulkhead into the boot area. It appears that it should come along here and then, well, sorry, just up here, and then push through the bulkhead into the boot area and then come through for the sender as well. So what I'll probably do is put an additional clip here and then just push it up right there. The clips on the bulkhead appear to be for fuel lines, so I'll change that. Whilst I'm underneath, I'll give you a little bit of a look at where we're at underneath, because it may be helpful to somebody. I'll just move over to the other side a little bit as well. There we go. So there we go then guys, a little look into our rear axle. Now at the front of the car, the brake lines are done, the loom's done, the power line's done. Anything that you wouldn't be able to get to with the engine in place is finished. Now the car is very high up on the jack stands, so I think what we're going to do next is get the car low to the ground as we can to give us as much height to lift in with the crane because the engine's so deep. And then I think we're going to fit the engine. In the next episode, no, I'm joking, I'm playing with you, but we are so close, so stay tuned guys.